Hi, good afternoon and welcome to this panel debate where we will be asking the question, is it time for the CV to retire? The question seems to have certainly hit a nerve as we've got more than 100 people signed up across Europe and in the UK. I believe lots of you are from the HR background, some founders, and I'm really pleased to see some candidates as well. I'm here in Bristol, UK, where it's a bit stormy today. My name is Sarah Rice. I'm editor of the HR networking platform, the HR World, which is a safe place for senior HR people here in the UK to network, share problems, and hopefully make a better place, workplace in the future for all of us. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to just open with a little context. Because as I was researching for today, I found out some interesting facts about the CV, which kind of blew my mind a bit. For example, did you know that the first ever recorded curriculum vitae was in fact that technological polymath from the Renaissance time, Leonardo da Vinci, who wrote his skills down for the Duke of Milan, who was, I believe, on a search, a recruitment drive to hire military engineers in 1482. Of course, there's lots of different variations of the CV, but it's 1950s where we see the CV really come up to the kind of traditional way that we operate today. And with the LinkedIn coming on stream in 2003, we can now understand, the digital CV. And of course, in the last decade, with advancements in technology, we are bang up to date and we're all kind of navigating the world together. So with almost 600 years of service, we are here today to ask, is it time for the CV to hang up its boots? And here to discuss it is an esteemed panel of tech and recruitment experts who between them and between you all, I'm sure you've seen a fair number of CVs in your time. You all have a slightly different take on where, how, and if we need to do away with them entirely. So I'd really like to sort of let you all introduce yourselves, just tell us a little bit about why you're here and who you are. And I'll start with Charlotte.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi everyone. My name is Charlotte. I am one of the founders of Equalture. Normally based in the Netherlands, now luckily enough in the sunny Dubai for 2 weeks. And I run an HR tech startup. What Equalture is doing is it's a hiring software that leverages gamification to help companies collect objective insights in not only their candidates, but also their current team to get a really objective assessment of whether someone fits the culture and the role. And we do that at the very beginning of the hiring process. So we basically replace that application form where you need to upload a resume, and we let people play some games right away. I'm really a big believer of the fact that the CV should retire, but I think we will dive into that. So that's who I am.
Fantastic, thank you. And Suf, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thanks. Hi everyone. So my name's Suf. I'm a talent manager for a venture capital firm called Forward Partners. We're based in London and we invest in startups who are pretty much early on in their journey, so at seed stage and pre-seed stage. And my role is pretty much advising and recruiting a lot of our founders on anything to do with talent, hence recruitment and hopefully getting rid of CVs.
Okay, so Alan, let's hear a little bit about you.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. So, I've worked in recruitment for quite a while. I don't remember talking to Da Vinci back in the day, but a good kind of 20 years under the belt. A lot of that's been recruiting for technology roles, and that's where my business really focuses now. So, I own ISL Recruitment. We're based in Bristol in England, and we work with startups and scale-ups. So 2/3 of our clients last year were between 10 and 50 employees. So kind of they've gone through that friends and family founding stage, and that's worked really well for them. They've got some traction. They need a bit of help and support getting to that next stage, and clearly a lot of that is needing good talent to join them on the journey. So from a personal point of view, I don't recruit. We've got a really good team who do that. I'll often spend my time kind of helping founders hire better, really. So mapping out their talent strategy, particularly when it comes to investment. So yeah, I've definitely, both in terms of the hundreds of people that I've helped recruit for clients and also the tens of people that I've recruited for my business, seen many a CV, both good and bad, but yeah, definitely keen to understand what different ways there might be to assess someone's potential and impact into your business.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, all. So we have about 35 to 40 minutes of panel discussion today. You will see we have a couple of polls open as well, so please do take full advantage of giving your opinions there. And our Q&A sidebar is also open for questions, which we will come to at the end of the panel discussion. So I guess it would be really good to kind of start on a kind of broader scale and look at, you know, what do you see the main challenges of CV-based hiring techniques as being? And Charlotte, I think you'd be a really good person to open that one up.
I think that like resume-based hiring is so full of bias and so much focused on what did someone do up to this point, and not necessarily focused on what is someone capable of, what is someone's personality actually. So we really care about what someone did, but with a resume, we basically say we don't care about what you actually can do. And I think there's a lot of bias involved there, and there's also a huge risk of missing out on some high potential talents that you could actually hire for your company. And I think especially one of the problems with resumes that everyone will experience within the next couple of years, that's going to force people to at least partly step away from resumes, is that we are living in a digital era where so many jobs are changing. Like, I think that half of the jobs that we now have will be removed within the next 20 years. And we also get a lot of new jobs, which we aren't even aware of at this stage. So that whole approach of basing your opinion on what someone did up to this point, with so many changing circumstances in the work field, is really going to cause some issues, I think, within the next couple of years. So I think that even the people in this poll today that think that a CV is essential in hiring, we'll have to realize that in a couple of years, that's unfortunately not how it's going to work for them anymore, that way.
I mean, Alan, it would be really good to hear your view on that, being sort of more at seeing the coal face, if you like, of more traditional recruitment. I mean, what do you think? What experiences and challenges do you have when it comes down to the CV?
If I think about, you know, the conversation, so we would never, as you'd hope, we would never simply, you know, find a CV and send it on to one of our clients. So we would always have a conversation. That might be, you know, 10 minutes to begin with. It might be 45 minutes, but we're always having a conversation. And, you know, I'm still constantly surprised by, you have a conversation with somebody you've inevitably made a judgment on based on a CV, and then they surprise you from that conversation. The amount of times recently I've spoken to candidates, particularly at the senior end, probably in light of the last 12 months, have started to think about taking a new direction, different challenge. And if I talk to them for 45 minutes, they really bring that to life, and it really talks to their personality, their skills, their capabilities. And then you look back at the CV that had kind of they'd sent you before the conversation. That, to be fair, I probably hadn't looked at that much. I look back at it and I think there's two different stories there. There's, you know, as Charlotte said, the curriculum vitae is, you know, Latin for the course of my life, but it's obviously it's everything that hasn't happened yet. You know, it's everything that's been in your life so far, and nothing about your potential and what you could do in the future. And I think particularly within the startup world, where they're not all doing something new and unique, but they're definitely looking to build something that's very much particular to them, then I think that there's going to be good and bad fits for them. But basing it on two sides of A4 and, you know, and what someone did 3 years ago or the name of the university, it doesn't fit right to me anyway, intuitively.
Doesn't quite matter if they've climbed Kilimanjaro when they were 18, that kind of thing.
Only because I'm a little bit jealous about that, but yeah.
And Suf, what about you? What's your sort of, you're kind of right at the cutting edge of startups and right at that beginning of maybe a lot of people thinking about the hiring process. I mean, what's your take on the key challenge that a CV represents?
Yeah, I think the stage that we work with our companies, we're in a very fortunate position because we can show them a lot of data on why CVs don't work, and hopefully there's some room for disruption there. I think, in my opinion, around the main challenges is it only shows the eligibility of a candidate versus the actual suitability. So resumes can actually have a lot of past history of the person. Candidates only tend to sort of report their entire history on what they think went well, versus how you can actually assess a person in terms of, like, according to the culture or according to the values. There was a study recently, I think a couple of years ago, where 85% of candidates were actually found that they lie on their resumes. So you're sort of judging this person on a piece of paper. They're coming into your business and then they're not necessarily performing up to the level that they said they would on that piece of paper. So I think there's a lot of room for disruption, and there's a lot of different ways of thinking that can be changed. And I think a lot of people just need to take that leap now, and sort of just run with it and try and see what happens.
I think building on what you said there, Suf, I mean, half the time I imagine it's not even written by them. You know, maybe it's written by their partner who's great at marketing, so creates a really good story, but actually doesn't reflect the key things they've got, or they've gone to a professional CV writer who's made it look great, but does it really truly represent the potential they've got? So I think there's, as opposed to, you know, whatever the other methods are we might go on to, but delving much deeper into that person rather than necessarily their ability to market themselves, although that's clearly still important.
Yeah, the CV writing service is something that I see pop up quite often. Even recently, I'm in a group that I'm part of doing some extracurricular study, and somebody genuinely asked if they have any contacts who can write their CV for them. This is usually a paid service, so the person who's writing the CV for you don't really have your best interests. It's more like a transactional exercise. So how do you know who's actually written that, or what work that person has done?
And there's something here as well in the writing of a CV and the understanding of it potentially around, I mean, there's a big buzz phrase at the minute about soft skills and how do you hire for that? I mean, Charlotte, it'd be interesting to know how, with your technology, the thinking around how to demonstrate somebody's other side of their personality within that context. How did you, what was your thinking behind that? Did you manage to bring that out?
Well, we of course have gamified assessments in our platform. Traditional assessments, but in a nice gamified manner to make it a bit more engaging and less socially desirable for candidates to go through. We decided to include that from day one when we started this company. Indeed, because you mentioned the rise for soft skills, and I think also the people would like to learn more about behavior these days. I think IQ, for instance, is something that was very popular 10 years ago. People are now really focusing on that soft skills, behavioral part. I think it's extremely important. I think it's we have a neuroscientist in our advisory board who did her PhD into the success predictors of someone in the workforce, and soft skills and behaviors have been proven to be the #1 predictors of your success eventually, if you fit the culture, if you fit the way of working. So for us, it was always a no-brainer to bring that into the application procedure. And I think that one of the benefits of doing it so early in the process is that you also have the opportunity for yourself to let that be part of your first impression of someone. Because I think that soft skill part should definitely contribute to the first impression that you get of a person.
Mm-hmm. Alan, I know that you've built this into your business in terms of your thinking from the recruitment process. I mean, how are you finding that in practice?
I think, what made me think about it a bit more, a few years ago now, and it definitely is something that requires a bit more thinking about, how we work with our clients, which is one of the reasons why I'm hoping to learn as much as contribute today. But we went through an exercise where we were looking to hire people to work for my business, and we sat down with the team and talked about what we were looking for, and it was things like achievement drive, and it was aptitude for learning, and it was sort of understanding their ambitions for the future and really what they wanted to focus on and why. And we just sort of thought about the CV and thought, well, we could get 100 or 300 or 3 CVs in, and how well would that really enable us to judge the best people? So we switched our hiring process round and kept CVs, but more for the last conversation rather than the first. And we kind of put in place a system where everybody that applied for the role, which in the end was 500 people for 4 roles, so a great volume, which saved us time by not looking at CVs. We sent them a short, sharp questionnaire, maybe 10 minutes or so, and asked them to come back with answers around those very things that we valued, such as their ability to learn and how they could evidence that, and ambitions for the future. And I suppose at the starting point, the best thing was that 75% of people didn't fill in the questionnaire. So out of 500 questionnaires that were sent within 24 hours, I think we had something like 120 come back to us. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure we missed good candidates in those, those people that didn't come back to us. We did do some engagements and videos to make sure that we weren't just creating too much friction. But as a starting point, those 120 people we then had telephone conversations with, we were that much more confident they had that little bit of achievement drive. Maybe their peers didn't, in terms of being bothered to put in the detail in the questionnaire, but also we had much more richer content to go with, and that's definitely kind of got me thinking, a few years on about how we can work with our clients around that. But I think there is still, issues where it's just such an expectation. It's what would you say, 400 or 500 years old. So of course it's difficult to disrupt something that's been set in stone for so long.
Yeah. But Suf, I guess a lot of your clients are sort of in the disruption business. So, have you got some experiences that you can kind of share that bring together that element of how the CV might come in at the end of the process, for example?
So what we basically done recently was we advertised for a role that necessarily sometimes would bring in sort of 50 to 100 applicants. And a lot of the time, the people applying are not that relevant. So we wanted to really appeal to like a very specific market. We removed sort of how we view CVs at the beginning, and we added a lot of structured questions that were specific to the role, which sort of gives us an insight into the individual's thinking and their approach to this type of scenario. Once those questions were reviewed and we thought they were a suitable fit, we kind of provided them with a working exercise. So this was like super short, 20-minute brief, wouldn't take them that long to complete, and then they presented that back to us for about half an hour, and it gave us a much better insight into firstly the person's cognitive approach to the task, and their activity that goes into that as well, and then presenting back to us. So how would they present that into a room and engage individuals, because that's necessarily a large part of what we do, being able to engage people and advise them through a certain process. And then we used a hiring tool, sorry, shameless plug, but we used Equalture to make sure that this person was, suitable to the team. So just like you were mentioning, competencies around like being able to manage multiple tasks, working at speed, etc. That sort of stuff you can't really get from a person's explanation. So the neuroscientific games really helped us with that, and gave us a much deeper insight into the person's behavioural aspect. And hopefully we can use this as a case study and data to now progress and use it for much more roles and get much deeper internal buy-in.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Charlotte, did you have any thoughts on that?
A lot of them. Do you have some guidelines for specific ones so that I know that I'm not distracting you from your conversation?
No, I was just going to say, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, if you think about the CV being the course of life, and this is a very present, immediate insight into the person and the skills and the capabilities, that sort of changes. It does really throw the traditional, I look at what you've done, I look at how you've been, I look at the sorts of things that you've done, the people you've mixed with, and I'm just going to see a real snapshot of what you can do for me right now, which I guess from a technology perspective is what the benefit is. Yeah,
definitely. And it's I think technology has made it possible to reveal so much more valuable information on someone, but at the same time, of course, we should realize that as Da Vinci was writing the first resume, it's also extremely. I can understand the fear of people letting go of that resume. Like it's. I think that for many recruiters, like the resume feels like you're sort of main gear, and you take away that main gear, and you need to replace that with something else that they need to feel comfortable with. So, as of course being a founder of an HR tech startup, I am a huge fan of bringing those technologies in to immediately get that snapshot. But I think we should be very aware of the fact this is a huge transition for people to go through, and it is not going to happen overnight also.
Yeah, and I think there's a great question come through from Benjamin Webster, which is on my list as well. It's actually, where do we start in the process of finding the candidates that are going to respond as well? So there's something in here about the job description, about thinking about it from the other side, and thinking about, how companies do, can we do more with companies to get them to improve how they search for people and think about what they're putting in their job descriptions in the first place that helps people engage with the process.
I think that's a really important part of it. We're focused on the CV, but the other side of it is definitely the job description. And I suppose if an alien lands on Earth today and you say to them, we try and match the best companies with the best people by getting 2 sides of A4 we call a CV and 2 sides of A4 we call a job description, they'd definitely question the wisdom of that. I was talking to a company earlier on who's definitely got a solution in this space where they can kind of bring to life a lot more actually what the skills are. And I think the founders I talk to are often guilty of recycling the job specification from their last company or jumping onto Google and finding a product manager or a CTO spec and working on, adapting that to them, rather than perhaps starting off with a blank sheet of paper, thinking about what's the purpose of this role, what are the outcomes that I'm looking for this person to help me succeed in, and therefore what are the capabilities. I think often people just default straight to those capabilities without tracking it back to the purpose of the role and the impact on the business. I think there's some issues also in terms of, I've definitely been guilty of it and seen founders do the same, where you just, you put 10, 15 skills down on a job spec and, and make them all essential, or maybe just have a token one as desirable. And I think in terms of both the language and the inclusivity of what job descriptions often become, it's then really difficult to get the best candidates in for that, whether they're sending you CVs or not.
Yeah, guys, I mean, do you have anything, Suf, when you go in to talk about the talent attraction program, how do you approach that? Keeping in mind that you don't want to have a CV in that process.
Yeah, it's a great question by Benjamin as well. And I think almost you need to have a distinction of two separate documents for job attraction. So you've got your job description, which is basically usually like a supermarket shopping list. The amount of adverts that I see at the minute where people have just copied and pasted 3-4 pages of their job description is enormous. And I think they need to now adopt a way towards having something which is more like an advert specific type. So the purpose of a job advert is purely to attract. So I think if you think about some of the billboards that you see at railway stations or what you drive in or in tube stations, they are there as a purpose to attract the consumer or a customer, and then you go away and do extra research on that. I think there's a lot on companies can do with that. The job advert should be very specific to the point, maybe share a couple of challenges that the hiring manager is facing in this role and the type of person they want to come in and solve this problem. Couple of paragraphs, couple of sentences, nothing major. That should hopefully attract the right candidate for you, which then should hopefully take them through to that company website, and they can do much more research into the company and hopefully apply via any sort of hiring process that company is going through.
Yeah, and I think on that point there, Suf, as well, the amount of startups I see who are creating some really positive attention on their journey. They're winning awards, they've got some really good problems that they're solving, and they're getting some traction with clients. And actually on their, the careers website, sometimes the careers section of the website is absent, and they're wondering why they're struggling to hire people. But actually sometimes it might be there and it's got a couple of job titles and maybe one of those what's called a job advert, but is actually more like a job description, the ingredients rather than the impact or the purpose. And I think, most candidates I talk to would much rather understand, a day in the life of an employee, or what the culture's like, and how the business works. And so I think there's a challenge sometimes if you're using a job description / advert just to attract that talent at that point in time, then actually you're missing out on a lot of the much richer things you can talk about, which is really what candidates buy on. And I guess bringing it back to CV, the same is true. If any of us sat in a room talking about an opportunity, if we structure it in the right way, it takes someone like critical thinking or problem solving, which I think the Scale Up Institute in the UK said is going to be one of the key skills for any type of worker in the future. Now, I've no idea which one of us is better at critical thinking than the other. And if I looked at our CVs, there's no doubt they'd be different, but I'm still not really sure it would give me insight into, how we stack up. So, not that you would necessarily receive our 4 CVs for a particular role, but just think about the breadth of talent, the diversity of talent you want to attract. And if something like critical thinking or problem solving or communication or writing is key for your business in the future, and if it's not, I think it probably should be, then actually, would you be able to judge the 4 of us based on our backgrounds and our potted history or our LinkedIn profile and what we've done? And I think, the answer for me would definitely be no. So I'd want something better to properly understand the impact someone can make and the potential they've got.
And what are the main, challenges when you're going in to speak with clients to overcoming some of the fears? I mean, there's some chat on the questions really about how you're convincing people to overcome maybe some of the, to stop clinging on to those more traditional ways of thinking. What are the main challenges that you find when you're trying to get them to go on that journey with you?
I think I'll be honest enough to say that we're not at the stage yet where I feel that we're convincing people. Hopefully part of the process today is educating people, but also educating myself. I think there's, in any service providers type role, there's always going to be a slight concern over being too bold and too brave and saying, actually, no, throw all your thoughts out the window and come and join us in this new world. So I definitely, hopefully one of the things I'll do after today is be a bit bolder and a bit braver in terms of the conversation I have with clients. But it's just it's so much of a default thing, isn't it? I can't think of a client who I would have a conversation with and they say, we need this chief product officer, or we really need to recruit a head of data science. And it's really difficult to picture in my head a conversation where I say, I'll find you the best people, and the next stage isn't, I'll send you some CVs, or them saying, okay, can you send me your best 5 CVs? So I think partly it's about, it's obviously showing the evidence. So it's not just the 4 of us talking and saying the CV is dead and hoping people that, people believe us in terms of our assumptions. I think it's then looking at, well, what are the other options and what's the evidence they do work? But I think more and more, hopefully we'll see progressive companies adopting this. They'll be able to attract the talent that is overlooked in the market, and particularly from underrepresented groups, pick out people that, can really, they can maximize the potential of them because they've based their hiring on what matters rather than the assumptions they've made. And the more companies do that, I think, like diversity as a whole, the more we'll see other businesses wanting to catch up with them and having to adopt and adapt their hiring process to really kind of to keep up and make sure they're not struggling to recruit people, but also struggling to retain people, because that's clearly a massive part of where you get the value from your people. Rather than just finding the best people, it's retaining them as well.
Yeah, I mean, that leads on really well to kind of, I guess, why this matters, because ultimately things are changing. The market's changing, the jobs market's changing, as you say, Charlotte. I mean, what's the heart of where you're coming from is taking this bias and reaching out to a more equal jobs market, or creating it. I mean, why does it matter so much?
I actually hope that by now most people are at least aware of why it should matter in your company. I think we made some huge steps, by the way, when it comes to diversity and inclusion over the last couple of years. I think more and more companies have realized that there's a social imperative to this topic, but there's also really a commercial imperative to this topic. It's contributing to more creativity and more successful teams, but I think that most people are aware of the fact that it works. I think the bigger issue for people still is, how am I going to actually get there? How am I actually going to de-bias my hiring from A to Z? And I believe that we are definitely not there yet, and we also won't be there yet. Also not within 5 or 10 years. I think that's going to take way longer. But I think that by focusing on that potential side of people, we can already work a bit on diversity and inclusion. I think diversity and inclusion, for me, what I really do believe in is that diversity happens in a company not when you are necessarily stimulating positive discrimination, for instance, but when you're just equalizing the playing field for everyone has an equal chance. And I firmly believe that diversity happens then. And then, of course, there's the inclusion part that you need to have in place also. But I think when it comes to diversity, equalizing the playing field, making sure that everyone gets to showcase themselves in the same way, can already take away some bias there. So I think that's definitely the first step. And I think, because I saw a question from Sherry, I hope I pronounced your name in the right way, about inequality and that women undersell themselves on the resume and men tend to oversell themselves. So equalize that playing field, make sure that everyone needs to provide you with the same information in a way that you determine how they provide you with that information. Females won't undersell themselves in an assessment that they need to take where men oversell themselves. That happens in a resume where you can describe yourself and where you have the room to put everything in it that you would like to have in it. So standardize the way that you get that information for people already really helps in making sure that at least everyone has an equal opportunity there.
Just to add to that, I think there's not a lot of data around into what doesn't work in a hiring process when CVs aren't included, and I think that's a step that everyone needs to take. But it's a shift in mindset as well from both parties, from an employer, but also from a candidate who's seeking a role as well. So I just wanted to share an example of how candidates can send out, there's a company called Social Chain, which is like a social marketing agency, and its CEO doesn't really have a presence on Wikipedia. And what happened was a recent digital marketing graduate literally just went onto Wikipedia, created a CEO his own profile, which would leverage his SEO on Google, and he landed a job immediately after letting the CEO know that he did this. I think so. Stuff like that. The person didn't have a CV. The CEO didn't need to look at his CV, but he provided some great input and output into the type of work he can do. It was spotted and he was hired. So it's more about standing out as well and getting creative with how you can come across as a future employee of an organization.
I mean, just to Sabine Ricker's point here, I mean, would you classify that as a soft skill? How do we assess soft skills, and how do people kind of respond? I mean, it's quite difficult, isn't it, when you talk about these terms, just to really kind of nail down what that guy's done. Not everyone's going to be able to do. I saw that story; it was brilliant. But how if you're not going to go and create a Wikipedia page for Stephen Bartlett, what's the kind of, how do you get over who you are in a way that's going to really stand out?
I think that falls under like initiative and being proactive. So always trying to, when you're looking for a job, or if you're looking to apply an organization you'd like to work for, you always have to ask yourself the question, what value can I bring, or what can I do to add value to that company? And then try and reflect that into your own work, and whether that would be creating like a portfolio of work you've done currently, maybe even creating yourself a website to showcase some of the work you've done and sending that off to the employer. Employers love people who stand out. And like to get stuff done, so coming across that way always puts yourself in good stead.
Brilliant. I mean, and I guess looking at the current situation, and Charlotte, you and I were talking about this in the sense that, we are now, because of the pandemic, operating on a hugely different playing field. Technology is now ingrained in our thinking in a way that it just wasn't even 18 months ago. How much of that is shifting your experience of the jobs market and how people are responding to, I guess, the new understanding of what technology can bring?
Well, I agree that I think COVID has. I think we would have never imagined that we could shift so quickly as COVID has proved to be. I think within the HR space, we have made a huge transition within only 12 months. I think that, technology has become critical, right? We need to keep hiring people, so we need to find a way to do that in a remote situation. And what you see, which is also pretty interesting relation to the resume, is that also the need for certain information about a candidate has really changed. We still have that feeling that if we can shake hands and have someone in the same room, that we can really experience how someone is and how someone behaves. And now that we have a remote interview, all of a sudden we can't anymore. So I think that technology is really helping in that sense, that we can get a grasp of who someone is without having the need to sit together in a room and get that gut feeling. And I think technology has changed. It's everywhere now, right? You need it for every step in hiring and HR, from sourcing to onboarding to collaborating with each other. This has definitely been the biggest technical revolution that we've had, I think, in this century.
It's a real catalyst. I mean, Alan, are you finding that it's changing how people are approaching the jobs market?
I think that, one of the things that, there's still, particularly in our world of tech talent, then the best people are getting 5-6 offers. So there's clearly demand, but I think at the lower end, the entry level, there's so much more competition for the roles there. So, I was speaking to a client back in March time of last year, and they'd just raised a Series B, and they went from, overnight struggling to find people to suddenly just being overwhelmed because they were on one of the list of companies that have got money to spend during a pandemic. So suddenly they had a couple of thousand applications in a month. And I think about their shift in process from looking at a few resumes or CVs to 1,000. And also from the candidate's point of view, there'd be some great talent in there, but how do they really stand out? And so I think that the pandemic's definitely meant that for, hopefully there'll be a bit more balance in the market, but for a lot of areas, there's much more supply there, than there is demand, particularly at that junior level where people have been reluctant to bring on talent that needs much more development support when they're in a remote environment and they're just not comfortable, their processes adapt to it. So yeah, 100%. I think that's shifted some of it. I think the other thing is that we've definitely seen, so time to hire being a metric that we've often observed. Maybe we were at 6 weeks from sort of getting a job issued to actually getting an offer made, accepted, and then obviously a bit of a lag before that person starts. It's gone down to 3.5 weeks in the last 12 months, which actually on one level I was like, oh, that's brilliant. But I think, thinking about it, there's a lot less engagement because we're doing 3 Zoom calls rather than 3 meetings, and there's often a lot less chance to people to talk to the team. I think because that process is condensed, then there's a lot that gets missed along the way. And so I think the more that people can front load the process with talking about what matters and try and measure what matters along with that, then whether it's a short or long hiring process, at least it means you're not too quickly shortcutting to making simple decisions and easy decisions on what a CV says to filter out those 100 CVs to find the 3 you want to talk to, but actually being a bit more measured in your approach. Even if that takes a bit longer, having the confidence that finding good talent slowly is much better than finding bad talent quickly.
Yeah, I mean, Suf, what do you reckon about the massive shift to a more tech process based sort of recruitment program?
Yes, big fan of technical based assessments, but I think it always has to be dependent on the role as well. So if we take software engineers, for example, and just going back to Alan's previous point where hiring managers always come and the instant thing to say is, can you send me 5 CVs or can you show me some CVs for this person? I think what would be great is if a CTO came to you and was like, can you find me 5 candidates with a great GitHub profile or a great coding base? And I think what companies can adapt when it comes to sort of say software engineering hiring, for example, is maybe try and have coding challenges as part of the application process at the beginning. So you would invite engineers to complete certain coding games that would assess basically what they're being hired to do is code for the platform or the company. Similarly to say if you were a graphic designer or a product designer, you would much rather look at the technicalities of this person by inviting them to share their portfolio of work or any examples of work that they've done versus trying to look for their CVs and seeing where they've worked at. So I think a big adoption on assessments based around this is a great feature to have. A lot of companies usually only ask for this sort of at an interview stage or potentially even after an interview stage, where I think that stuff should be brought to the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Partington raises an interesting sort of thought along those lines. Is could you see a benefit of getting rid of CVs altogether and matching business and candidates sort of by key metrics? So I guess it's along the same lines. And then trying to get, I guess he says so then it would spark a conversation, which sounds a little bit like sort of job Tinder slightly, but how do you so are those kinds of the sorts of innovations that you're expecting to see now as we're kind of getting into this idea that this sort of course of your life event document isn't just the be all and end all?
So I think you're referring to the question that Ian asked, right?
Yeah.
I can see where the question comes from. I do think, though, that if you keep mapping candidates and jobs based on experience, titles, these kind of things, and what you basically do is you put the resume into some sort of standardized database. But it's still the exact same information that you're relying on. So it's still that past rather than that potential part. So to be fair, I actually don't think that we will see those technologies arising that much in the coming years.
Cool. And I guess, I mean, one of the big issues around this is D&I, and we've talked about that a little bit, but also then retention. and I guess, I mean, it goes back to this idea of if we're taking out those judgments at a human level, what does that look like in the future? I mean, how do we, because again, it's this merge between the workplace and the society and how those things sort of interact. I mean, are there sectors here or locations or regions, for example, that are kind of maybe ahead of the game? I mean, I'm imagining that the tech sector is one of those just by its very nature. But I mean, do you see kind of, sectors where HR teams are kind of really grasping this and taking it forward in a meaningful way?
I think that mostly that applies to the tech sector.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the reasons, to be fair, I think that hopefully they all care about diversity and inclusion. I think the underlying reason why more tech companies start looking for alternatives that eventually result in D&I is that there's such a huge war for talent that you can't simply base your decision on, I need to have an engineer that has a coding test that went well. Maybe I should look for the skills that that the top performers in my engineering team have, and I should look for those skills so that someone can learn it quickly, for instance. So I think that the lack of tech people in such an overloaded market has forced tech companies, I think, to be a bit more creative, leading, I think, unconsciously to more D&I already. But Suf, I saw that I completely interrupted you when you wanted to start, so I hand it over to you now.
No, that's okay. It's a really good question, and I want to share an example. Like, we've been talking about tech sectors a lot, and I'm conscious there might be people outside of this sector. So a company that does this really well is a bakery in New York, which basically produces like millions of pounds worth of baked goods to a lot of the large retailers in New York, such as Whole Foods and Ben & Jerry's. They have something called an open hire policy. So they have no CVs. Candidates would basically express an interest in working for the company on their website, which then gets put onto like a waiting list type of format. And every time a job comes up, the person who's next on that list basically gets offered the role. And the organization invests, I think it's about $1,000 to $2,000 per person on soft skills training. So they would invest this and send the person on training courses and put them through other sorts of educational aspects of it. And the business is profitable for the last 38 years, which is a great example of, something different that they've done, and it's worked out great for them. And I think Superdrug also in the States adopted this approach for a lot of their warehouse recruitment to sort of deal with festive periods and other periods of demand. And the only core questions they asked was, are you able to stand on your feet for 8 hours? Are you happy with X salary? And I think there was another health and safety focus questions. And if you answered yes to them, then you were pretty much there and you got yourself a role, which is a great example. And I think we've talked a lot about experienced roles, but even like for entry level and providing opportunity, I think this is a great example that people can adopt and even try and replicate.
Yeah, Alan, did you have any thoughts on that?
No, I think we'll definitely see, certain sectors, and Charlotte's right. I'm sure the tech sector, both in terms of their mindset more so than other sectors, but also their desire and their need to find the best talent is going to be key. I think it's also about kind of the experience you have, and if you know that you've come into a certain role yourself, and actually you've come through a varied path that isn't obvious, that one role made you suitable for the next. I guess at an individual level, you'll hopefully be much more open to different ways of thinking about it, and then hopefully we'll see that demand grow within those industries for understanding how are these companies, how are these founders able to hire the best talent, and therefore how can I kind of make sure that I'm catching up with them and hopefully getting ahead of them, and maybe we'll see that means that there's less CVs used. I don't think we'll ever see that it disappears, and it's not going to be an overnight shift. But yeah, 100%. I think we'll see. I hasten to say kind of progressive because I'm obviously putting very much my view on it. But I think we'll see much more experimentation in sectors like tech, where there's going to be a demand for the best talent that needs disrupting. Needs something different, despite a lot of people being out of work at the moment.
I mean, it's really interesting. Casper has raised a really good point here about time and about the time invested in the recruitment process. The recruitment managers and HR teams are busy people. There's a lot in here, isn't there, to kind of really think about in terms of embedding in your organization. And I guess leadership comes into this conversation quite a bit. I mean, in the sense of by the time you get to the CV is, a kind of a product of a process. But in terms of what it feels like, what you're talking a lot about here is culture. So the organization itself and what it's looking for. I mean, how important is leadership in this, in sort of embedding these different types of hiring processes in your organization?
Definitely key, I would say. I think that if someone in the leadership position is not believing in an innovation tool or is not seeing the urgency for this, then it's definitely not going to happen. I think, indeed, as you mentioned, this is not only a operational shift towards a new working standard, this is a huge cultural shift that people need to embrace. Because there are so many people also involved in the organization. There's the there's the recruiters, you have maybe the team that is participating into hiring, you have the hiring managers. There are so many people that have a vote on that ultimate decision, that I think if it's not part of your culture, if it's not from the management team, the leadership team, an inspiration to change that process, then it's never going to happen, I think.
Suf, I mean, you probably got quite a few thoughts on that.
Yeah. So we rarely see HR or people or talent leaders sitting on boards of organizations or even at C-suite levels. So I think it's very important for a lot of execs currently sat on boards to try and start adopting how important sort of human capital professionals can be on the boards, because it can really adopt the way the culture of an organization is transformed and how they work, and having that from the beginning and having that from the top will really filter its way down and see some great progress in that as well. So I think hopefully in the not so near future, we should start seeing a lot more HR and talent people sitting on boards, sitting at C-level, and really putting these initiatives and practices across so people can start to adopt them.
Yeah, Alan, what do you think about the kind of the leadership position on when you're talking to your clients? What's the how are you finding this? Is there a shift? Is it happening out there?
Yeah, I think it's essential to kind of drive that change no matter what area you're talking about. So having that buy-in for leadership, I think we're definitely seeing, as Seth alluded to, more companies more quickly in their journey, sooner in their journey, looking at how they can bring a people or a talent function or capability into their business, whether it's either working with someone like myself or Suf, or actually having somebody on the board or as an advisor that can help move them forward. There's no doubt that hiring badly, will kill many a good startup. And actually, people recognize that there's a need to get investment. And of course, you need to get traction and demonstrate product market fit. But right up there is access to talent and skills. And as part of that, that's got to be, I can't just do the norm and expect to get better or different results, and so actually this is part of a much bigger thing around how do we find better talent, how do we assess the best talent, and then moving on, how do we onboard and retain the best talent to mean that we've got the best business in the future. And so that's got to be a key thing on the leadership agenda, and to impact the change, it's got to be supported by those that are senior within a business, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely feels, through the HR network, it definitely feels it's still a sort of a nice to have, this kind of thinking. It's not necessarily embedded right at the core. So how do HR people walk into the boardroom and sort of prove the concept in terms of hard facts? Mostly boards are led by the money people. So, what's the core benefit of saying, right, we're scrapping the CV, we don't want to see another CV. Here's why. What do they, how are they going to do that?
I think if I could jump in, it's not going to be the one of the four of us turning up and saying there's a new dawn and come and join me. It's going to be through evidence and data. So whether that's either evidence around unconscious biases and demonstrating people that the CV isn't the best predictor of performance, or that actually if you look at the CV number 100 versus number 1, there's no doubt you're going to score it, poorly compared to that first one, and providing the evidence to show that actually at a filtering level the CV really isn't there. I think it's also providing evidence about the future rather than the past, and saying that actually as an organisation, our talent agenda for the future needs to really prioritize these things, whether that's critical thinking, problem solving, or some sort of broader aspect, and demonstrating through research that has been done, through insight, that this is where the organization needs to be in the future. And actually these are the tools, these are the resources, these are the systems we need to change, improve, or throw away, or renew, to make sure that actually we can build the best talent pool for the future. I think that the final point there is that so many businesses I've spoken to over the last 12 months, if you ask them about where they've seen the key people in their team flourish and actually contribute to some really challenging times, on the flip side, where they've actually been a bit, I'd say, disappointed, but where they haven't seen people maximize their potential and adapt to a fast changing environment, it never comes down to the framework they were using to develop code, or actually the tool they used for marketing automation. You know, the people that have provided the most value in the last 10 months in really changing times have been the people that have demonstrated a lot of the so-called softer skills we've talked about today. You know, and hopefully the next 12 months will be a bit stable than the last 12, but there's no doubt that whatever industry you're in, there's big change coming around the corner. And I think it's then thinking about how you have the right talent pool to adapt and adopt to whatever the future may hold for you.
And I mean, just on that, I guess, I can see Sabine and Charlotte having a chat there. What's the data already out there? I mean, how's the best way to go around collecting it in the first place, and then what already exists?
Well, I think there's already a lot of research out there. Sorry, I have a really weird background noise, by the way.
Okay, Charlotte's in Dubai, so she's got the sunshine outside.
I think that there's a huge amount of research already that you can find online about the extent to which behavior overperforms in job success predictability rather than experience. So I think if you really would like to go to search for the evidence, you can definitely find it in the internet. I also think, though, that if you would like to try to convince your management team to go for this method, you should take it like one step at a time. I think you should not go to the management team and say, hey guys, today we need to let go of resumes completely and we're going to introduce this method to do so. Try to say, hey, is there a way that we can combine that, and that we at least have a different angle to look at someone and take that into consideration also, and see if you can find a way to then keep focusing more and more on the second aspect, for instance. It should be in transition, right? It doesn't need to be. It doesn't have to be a revolution in your management team. It needs to be a transition. Otherwise, I think you won't get them on board, even if you have all the proof in the world.
Yeah, Aaron Phillips raised a really good question, actually, just on that. And I guess the transition period here is key. But are we in danger of shifting the bias from human nature to an algorithmic one instead, which I'm sure you've heard before? But I mean, it's a really good point, isn't it? Like, human resources is called human resources for a reason. What's your thinking on that?
I think each and every algorithm is biased. People who say algorithms are not biased, that's not true. They are programmed by humans in the first place, so there's no way they can be 100% unbiased. I do think that there's a huge difference between a human being and an algorithm in being biased. Our frame of reference, we make 10,000 of decisions on a daily basis unconsciously, so we have that bias in us. I think that there is definitely a danger in there, and I think that some people also fear shifting away from human evaluations to an algorithm-based evaluation. But remember that an algorithm sounds super scary, but you're always still there. You always have the possibility to keep auditing your algorithm, to keep assessing it for a bias that is in there. Eventually, it's programmed by human beings in the first place, and it's also being assessed by human beings to make sure that from an ethical perspective, there's no bias in there. So I think that it's more easy to keep assessing and fine-tuning an algorithm than trying to get the bias out of a human being.
Suf, what do you think about that? Sorry.
It's an amazing question. I think that's a whole topic in itself and very debatable, but I believe it's depending on who's obviously teaching this algorithm, right? And who's engineering it and what the purpose of the algorithm is. So I think it takes a very steady approach from the human aspect of it before this algorithm is engineered, and really think about what you want it to learn, what the outcomes you want it to be firstly, and then come up with a solution in terms of how that would work and how that would teach itself.
I think we had an example from Amazon a couple of years ago where they implemented an algorithm to help them with the hiring process and had to pull it quite quickly because it was prioritizing white men over all other groups, because the algorithm was programmed to look at the characteristics and often many of the things that are contained within a CV that made their management, their leadership team. And actually that was based on where someone went to university and whether they mentioned sort of female things in their CV versus male things, and kind of bias towards that. So I think it's like Suf said, it depends on what your algorithm is looking at. And I don't think there's clearly some great tech solutions out there, but I don't think it needs to be a tech process. It can be, if the four of us are hiring for a particular role and we're able to talk about what really matters to us, sometimes it can be as simple as sitting in a room agreeing, actually, if we're talking to someone about critical thinking and their ability to scale an operation internationally, what are the key things we're looking for? If we're talking to them about scenarios and how they would approach things, then what does a good answer look like? What does a bad answer look like? And even just doing that as a 30-minute exercise and then using that to go into the filtering process, whether it's filtering CVs or interviewing somebody, can be a very manual way to do it. But for the sake of half an hour, I believe that objectivity you'll bake into your process and the ability to score and measure based on what matters, rather than because Suf and I support Liverpool or whatever it may be, is going to give you much better hires. So I don't think people should be they should embrace the tech if it feels right for them, but don't be scared off by the fact that you can still have the human element in the process, rather than suddenly trusting algorithms and technology and AI to make the decisions for you.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned something really important there, Alan, because I think that some people think that, hey, I want to do something about bias, I need to remove people completely then from the process. I think after all, we are dealing with the most human aspect of a company, the people that are actually going to work in a company. So I think there should always be a human touch in a recruitment process. And I think it's always very important. It's not only the candidate representing themselves towards a company, the company should also sell themselves to a candidate. So there needs to be some interaction and have a chat with each other. So I think we should help people in that first step, but we shouldn't filter people out of the process.
I think that's a really good point, because just listening to our conversation today, it feels like the candidates got to do a lot of navigating of this world. I mean, what kind of advice would you give candidates right now? I mean, I know it's difficult because there's so many different areas, but in terms of sort of helping them navigate how to approach these different interview processes.
I think one of the things that, I mean, obviously, Sarah, you lent a hand to us putting together a retention report, that we launched early part of last year, and actually that was data from 250 candidates that had left one job to join another. And the number one reason that candidates cited for leaving a job was around culture, and as part of that, around empowerment, accountability, and communication. So I think it's also part of it is encouraging candidates to really think about what they value, in terms of the values of an organisation and the things they want to achieve and progression, more so than actually the job title and the requirements of a role. There clearly has to be a match there, but actually to get that long-term value from a candidate's point of view, although no one expects a job for life, then hopefully most people go into a job expecting it to give them a good fit for a while rather than for a short time. And I think often it's going to be then about thinking about the values you're seeing and matching those as much as actually the technical and the hard skills within an organisation and from a job description.
Suf, did you have anything to add?
I did, yes. I think it's really good timing. Sue's question has come up as well around how do we educate candidates and job seekers, and if it's something that goes back to careers and schools. I think it is definitely an education piece. There's not a lot out there in terms of how graduates or school leavers or college students should look for careers. Not that I'm aware of. I didn't go through that. I think the most key thing that candidates can look to do is add value and just be a bit more creative out of the box. So we receive hundreds and hundreds of applications a day. Alan will know that, Charlotte will know that, yourself will know that as well. So it's more about how do we find that 1 in a million or that gold candidate that we want to find. So all it takes is a little quick search on LinkedIn or a public forum or Google of the company. Think about the person you think will be recruiting and just firing them a quick message on email and showing your extra value and why you think you'd be suitable. And I think that additional 10 to 20 minute research work will really put you in much greater stead in the long run, instead of just pressing apply and then hoping for the best, because it can get lost in a lot of noise.
And Charlotte, I guess from your perspective, how do people kind of educate themselves on how to, I guess, think about technology in the interview process?
From the candidate perspective?
Well, yeah, both actually. I mean, but I guess from a candidate perspective, first off, yeah.
Yeah, I think let's be transparent, of course, that shifting away from a resume could be could cause the same fear for a recruiter, of course, as it can fear for a candidate.
Yeah.
Although it's I think it's for the better if you don't need to apply with a resume only. How to educate candidates in that? I think it's I must say that my expertise is not really within that candidate specific field, like how to make sure that candidates also transition to that new way of hiring. We are more focused on how to make companies aware of the fact that it works for them. But
so what can they do? What can companies do to help? I mean, I think it's quite a good, we're coming up to the hour, so it's quite a good time to sort of just, I think about the HR people, think about the companies out there. What are the top tips that we've got to give them before we sign off today to say, these are really the 3 things that you need to be thinking about? And Charlotte, good place to start with you.
Get behind your computer, go do some research and everything that's possible. There are so many free stuff out there that you can try out. Maybe start from the core. What is it that we actually would like to improve in our process? Are there things that we don't know from candidates that we would like to know that a resume is not providing us with? Start from that, maybe what's missing there. And the internet is full with guides and playbooks and articles on how to make sure that your hiring process becomes more innovative. So I think there's so much out there. You just need to start doing it. I think that we tend to talk a lot about this topic, where we not always tend to take action on it.
Brilliant. And Suf, what would you advise clients about to embark on a new way of thinking?
Just adopt it and try it out and see what happens. If you fail, it's fine. You've got data to back it up. Learn from it and try and improve it again. I think the first step in trying something new is just to do it and see what happens. It's the unknown, so none of us really have hard data around it.
I take that into my running schedule. And Alan, what would you advise at this stage in the future?
Yeah, I think like Seth said, being a bit braver, a bit bolder. If I think back to that process we ran 5 or 6 years ago, where we didn't use CVs until we'd, just really closing off the offer stage of the candidate to more have a chat with them once we'd already assessed they were right for the role. Then, 6 years on, one of my senior team is came from that very process. So, I've definitely, I suppose, got the confidence that can work more effectively. I think probably if you're struggling a little bit to take hold of, well, what is it that I really value and what should I be looking for if I'm not going to default to the logo of their last employer or the name of the university where they had a degree, I think I'd probably start with your team at the moment, and I'd go through a process and I'd say to them and talk to your leaders, what is it that we really value? If we look at the capabilities, particularly in the last 12 months, what sorts of things are we consistently seeing that we are confident are part of our key talent strategy for the future? And I think that'll give you 2 things. I think it'll give you some brilliant engagement with the team at the moment, so helping that retention and being able to help people understand that it's their adaptability and proactivity or problem solving or critical thinking that has made them valuable to you. To be able to articulate that to them and bake it into the progression will create some value in itself. But actually then be able to first of all say, okay, fine, these things we're looking for, I'd be surprised if they end up being things that you would often see in a CV or have confidence you can see in a CV. So if you can, then great, carry on. But assuming that you can't, and I think for the majority of us that would be the case, then think about with a hiring process, whether it's 2 simple questions that you respond to everybody's application with, or whether it's some things you put on your website before someone even applies that either attracts them or deters them. It's just thinking about how you can front load a couple more of those things to begin with. And actually, if you find out that those are things that give you much better talent, then just build on that. And a story to share from a founder I spoke to a few months ago. He had a job description which at the very bottom of the page and a half had 2 words, which was no jerks. And I was talking to him on the phone and saying, well, actually, if you're looking to hire people into your business, there was 4 people in the business, and he was looking for the first non-founding member of the team. What's the most important thing to you? And straight away it was no jerks. And we had a bit of a debate about whether a jerk perhaps identifies as one or whether they need a bit more guidance. But also it was so important, and it was stuck away at the bottom of 2 sheets of paper. So he then transformed it and made it the first 2 bits of his advert. And actually, talking to him a couple of weeks later, he probably had a few less applications, but the engagement he was getting, the feeling he was getting on that matching was so much better. So I don't think this needs to be a big grand process. It can be taking 2 words and highlighting the importance of that, or it can be taking 2 soft skills and talking about them a bit earlier, or it could be throwing out the CVs and going straight to kind of the end game maybe. But I think it's just about whatever your level of risk is, whatever your need is, it's taking a few steps, big or small, and then reviewing and reflecting from there, really.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to everyone who's joined this afternoon's debate. I hope it was useful. I certainly learned a lot. I'm sure Leonardo, if he was here, would have contributed in kind as well. So thanks again. And to Charlotte from Equalture, Suf from Forward Partners, and Alan from ISL Recruitment, and from me from the HR world, have a great afternoon, and we're sure we'll see you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.